Good evening. One more time. Good evening. There we go. Thank you. All right. My name is A.J. Johnson. I'm the city manager here in Urbandale. And thank you for attending this second session, this informational session on a complete street program and for Aurora and a 70th. The council wanted to have some informational meetings and some Q&A sessions for interested residents and citizens to learn more about the program so that they can make some decisions to come later this fall in the CIP program. CIP is our capital improvement program. It's a program that we lay out as a city for 5 years, looking at capital projects, street construction, trails, those type of things for the next 5 years. This program has been out there before, but the council put it on hold because they wanted to get more public input on it because they realized that it has an impact on the residents, the school, and the neighborhoods in general. So with that, tonight's presentation will be made by our representatives from an engineering company. City engineer, we'll introduce him in a minute, but I wanted to lay down some of the ground rules. First, as we all start with every meeting, we read character counts. Urbandale is a national leader in character counts, endeavoring at all times to promote and model the principles of trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. In conducting tonight's meeting, we expect that all participants will act in a respectful manner consistent with these principles. So as I mentioned, in a minute, we'll introduce our speaker. They'll provide an overview of the project and then let him go through the project first. Then we'll have a Q&A session. If you have questions for him or the staff, we'll answer those for you. And we're going to do that in a very orderly and polite fashion. We will alternate sides of the room for questions and answers. Keep your comments brief, keep them civil, and that we will try to get every comment addressed as best we can. This is being YouTube, so if you want to come back and look at it on a YouTube channel, as it was the first time, you'll be able to do that. There's a sign-up sheet out front that we have, and so if we have questions or issues, we can get you additional information as well. So again, thank you for coming tonight. We will begin with John, if you'd like to introduce our guest, please.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm John Larson. I'm the Director of Engineering and Public Works. In the back that was greeting you as you came in is Kristen Brostrom. She's our Assistant Director of Engineering. And tonight we do have Mark Parrington with Snyder & Associates. They did the design on our project, so he'll run through the project, explain why we did some different choices that we did, and then of course open it up at the end for questions. So I'll let Mark start here.
Okay, thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate you giving us the opportunity to walk through this. We'll try to move through as quickly as we can on a summary of the two corridors, and then, you know, as AJ said, we'll have questions and answers after that, and try to do everything we can to answer your questions. All right, real quick, just to remind everybody, what we are here to talk about tonight is complete street projects that relate to Aurora Avenue from 86th Street on the west end to 70th Street on the east, and then 70th Street from Hickman Road all the way up to Meredith. I'm gonna step us back up a level and talk about kind of national guidance as it relates to complete streets. We get a lot of information from our Federal Highway Administration, also a professional organization, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and you can see some quotes here out of some of their information on complete streets. But bottom line, what we're trying to approach with this as we talk about it is that all modes of transportation are served. That's our overall goal when we're dealing with complete streets. We look at these things just not as a street anymore, the physical pavement, but we try to look at it as a corridor. And that corridor may have street for vehicle traffic. We could have bike accommodations through it, whether they be lanes or trails. We also have pedestrians and dealing with sidewalks or other means of mobility. So that's the kind of thing we want to have in the back of our mind as we look at a corridor like this. When we talk about complete streets, again, we're quite often dealing with lane conversions from what we traditionally have in our corridors. Again, a lot of places where we have built infrastructure that is quite old, 60, 70 years, goes back to just a different way of how we approach building streets. And how we're dealing with it now quite often is we see a lot of times where we have old traditional 4-lane streets, and we look quite often to turn those into what we call 3-lane streets. By doing, you may hear the term road diet, where we eliminate a lane, but we really create turning lanes that make for a much safer situation. A lot of this will help us calm the traffic down is the term we use, where really what we're trying to do is just get traffic to adhere a little better to the speed limits we have out in the corridor. That brings us a lot of safety. If we can get all of our traffic moving in a more uniform speed rather than great variances of speed, that helps us a lot with safety in a corridor. And then, again, the comment I mentioned about improved mobility and access for all types of users. Again, we're seeing more and more people bicycle now for a matter of health, and maybe for economics. Certainly bicycle means now with electric bikes is introducing another avenue of a way to move if you're not a real efficient bicyclist, but gives you an ability to move along in a corridor on a bike quite well. So, and then the last thing that we find when we do a lot of these projects in corridors is that we actually enhance the neighborhood quality of life. If we can slow people down in a corridor, I'll get to this in a bit with your areas, but really they're neighborhoods is what they are. And if we can get traffic slowed down in those neighborhoods, that should help with just your enjoyment of your own neighborhood, your own front yard, and help with making it ability for people to move, to parks, to schools, to some retail, just a lot nicer setup for the corridor. Complete Streets Master Plan. This city has been working on this for a lot of years. If you notice there right kind of from the start, we're going back 8 years ago. The city adopted a policy that was put out there with our Metropolitan Planning Organization and a lot of our communities within the Des Moines metro area passed to try to work towards these goals of complete streets to help provide for all users in a corridor. With that, there was public engagement then done afterwards as they moved into an actual master plan for the community of Urbandale. And then the plan was adopted in 2019. And you can see kind of a select quote I pulled out of that. But again, those who participated and brought input to it talked about how much more important it was to them to see bicycling, walking, these other types of modes of transportation, if you will, to be a heightened awareness as we look at our corridors and what we do with our roadways. This master plan is out there. It's linked, I know, on the project website, so you can look it up if you're not familiar with it. But I think a key thing in this, right out of the beginning, was that there were the top three public responses for the vision of this plan. And what everybody who weighed in on this through the public input talked about, they wanted safe, they wanted it very accessible, and they wanted to work towards connectivity with everything we did with these complete streets. And then what I'm showing you here is as we start to talk more, which is a key feature of what we're dealing with tonight, is talking about bicycle facilities, is that these are some of the tools that are in the toolbox of complete streets. You see the various kinds really here throughout the community. You've got, I believe, all four in place out here now at this time. But these are the different types of tools we have in developing accommodation for bicyclists as we look at perhaps these buffered lanes. We have many shared use trails out here in the city of Urbandale. And again, the other mechanisms we can do it with. And the last thing that I failed to mention as I started this and introduced myself is that I'm certainly not a stranger to out here. I was a Beaverdale, Hoover kid, been here doing traffic engineering. I've worked with the city since probably about 88, 89. So very familiar with the area, very familiar with the corridors. I joke I was a lifeguard over at the old pool until it was torn down. So know Aurora and 70th quite well through all my years, and seen it evolve. Again, didn't just walk upon it here a year ago and start looking at things. Very familiar with how it's changed over time. But what you have in front of you is a map out of the master plan that was done with that Complete Streets effort. And you can see this area we're focused on, obviously, over here on the east side of the community. So when you look, again, now we're drilling down in, we're talking about these key corridors. Aurora Avenue from 86th to 70th, and then 70th Street from Hickman up to Meredith. And the plan talked about opportunities for how to create connectivity. You see a lot of different little green lines and segments all over that map there. Those are various trails that were in place, bicycle routes, if you will. Used to be more commonly how we refer to some of these things. But the idea being, how do we start to create more of this connectivity? You've had wonderful opportunities out in your growth area of your community where it's been a little easier with some of the long straight corridors, roadway widening, to have that separated trail where you've got plenty of room, put it right down the side of the street. But it's a little more challenging as we get back into the older built area of the community of how do we create some connectivity and routes for these types of things. So now we'll get specific into each project. Some of the guiding principles we had in this as we started the project that we were given is that, okay, right from the top, the complete streets, we want to work on improving these bicycle routes and this connectivity. That was one of the main goals of why we're talking about both corridors. We want to look at an opportunity to get a much safer roadway sharing environment between vehicles and bicyclists. So that was another goal we have in there. No right-of-way impacts. Unlike some traditional infrastructure projects, big roadway projects that might be widening, getting into needing more room, imposing upon property adjacent to it, we weren't trying to do any of that. We're trying to keep everything within the public right-of-way that's out there in each corridor. And even further, I'll go down a bullet from that, is that minimizing that physical construction. We're really not talking about moving curbs, doing any of that. We're taking what we have out there and how do we just reconfigure, reallocate that space we have out there between property line to property line, or even more so from curb to curb. And that's a lot of what we do with these complete streets projects is, again, we just try to reassign what we're doing out there with the roadway. A lot of the things we're going to see with this too is that it'll mitigate any major disruptions to vehicle traffic. Most of these things we're proposing will be able to allow vehicle traffic to still flow to what people are generally used to, and it shouldn't cause that much disruption. And then the last thing with that just kind of falls out of some of those other things I mentioned, no right-of-way, minimize physical construction, is the idea that we're going to minimize project implementation costs. Again, many infrastructure projects can be quite expensive because of the level of effort it takes to put something together with a major storm sewer project, major sanitary sewer project, major roadway project. The idea with this is really we're looking at things that are just paint, signs, maybe a little fresh coating on the road to help identify those lanes a little better when we'd make a change. But it's a very low cost improvement. So it's kind of a low hanging fruit for something we can try to accomplish without having a huge amount of capital outlay for the community. So again, allows it to fit into the CIP much better. Okay, talking a little bit about Aurora and what we have out there. Aurora, from one end to the other in that stretch, is about 41, 42 feet wide, any given location. We have 4 travel lanes. By typical travel lane standards, that's actually a little more narrow. It's really about 10 feet, 10 and a half feet per lane. Traffic out there is somewhere it gets up as high as about 4,600 for a day. That's on a typical day throughout the year. There are times when it's less, there's times when it's a little bit more. But generally speaking, that's the daily demand. During the peak hour, which reflects usually related to the schools, we have about 550 vehicles that try to flow through that corridor from 70th out to 86. That's generally the demand in that area. This traffic, I'd also note, is that years ago, probably about 2,000 things peaked out. It was as high as it got up around 6,000 to 7,000, and it has since come down. And I think a lot of that is just the area is mature and established. Some of the things change with the demand needs, with other roadway corridors in place, and you don't have as much traffic on it. So that's something to note with the corridor, is that we aren't in a position where the traffic seems to be going up and up like we are sometimes out in the rapid growth areas. We're constantly asking ourselves, if we have 2 lanes, do we need more lanes? When do we need to do that? Is that going to be enough? Are we going to need even more? So I think that's a key point with this, is that our traffic is very well established, and if anything, has been on a decline. It's just a reality. It's what we see in a lot of locations and situations with the land use as it gets very stable and mature. Speed limit on the whole corridor is 25 miles per hour. And when you look at this 4-lane corridor the way it is, the daily capacity of a corridor like that is about 18,000. I know that sounds like a lot of traffic going through there, but when you look at it versus we have a demand of about 4,600 in a day, that corridor could actually carry. If we really wanted to line everybody up and push that much traffic through it, it wouldn't be very tolerable if you lived in the neighborhood, but that's how much could go through it. So you can see we have a lot more road than what we have demand out there. Some other, just unique items. There's just a very short stretch of parking out at the west end on the south side near Country Club in there. Of course, the schools are a major element to the corridor with the middle school and the high school. We have a couple signals, always stop at 70th. And then we have a few rollout stop signs that are also associated with the school traffic for the most part. And then also another pedestrian crosswalk at 82nd. It used to be a stop sign that came out, but I believe with the change in the elementary school to the south, that was taken out. Some safety history in the corridor. In a 5-year history, this goes back because when we were first taking a look at this, we've had about 42 crashes out in the corridor. Unfortunately, tragically, there was a fatality out there near the high school with a pedestrian. We've had other crashes that have resulted, you see some injuries in there. And 70th and 72nd, probably not a surprise, those intersections are where we see the greatest frequency of crashes occurring just because of the intersection, I think, as it relates to being around the high school traffic a little more. Some of the causes are listed in there. People failing to yield when they come off a side street properly, but also when they're making left turns, they're not paying attention, or we just have driving too fast, which is something that, again, we have it posted for 25 out there. It's kind of hard to imagine that should ever be a problem if everybody is adhering to that speed, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen. Common types of crashes, you can see in there, the broadside, those are typically where someone's coming off of that side street, turning in front of somebody. But you also see the rear end and even the side swipes in there, or even the single vehicle ones where, again, that's probably related to speed. And they left the road and hit an object. So altogether, when we look at the corridor, certainly some crash history going on, fairly typical, I'd call it. And then just to point out there at the bottom is, with clarity, is that there has been that one pedestrian crash, and then there were also 3 bike reported crashes in the corridor. I believe a couple of the bike crashes were actually, it was unique. When you looked into them more, it was almost like a bicyclist ran into a car as much as the other way around, but still had that collision. So now to speak specifically to Aurora Avenue and what our intentions are to try to redesignate it, reallocate the space out there as you go from one end of the corridor to the other. So at the top of the screen here, you see the existing conditions. So generally, we have this 4-lane roadway with those, about 41 feet, 42 feet of width out there. And then we have the buffer and, sidewalk conditions. What you see right below that is what we are proposing to do. This would be more in an area along the high school. So from about 70th, I'll work the other direction here, from 70th back over just past the high school and the senior center. We're looking at a situation where we take those 4 lanes and we reallocate them to 3. And so the key to that is the 3 vehicle lanes, where now you have a through lane in each direction, then you have a center 2-way left. This shouldn't look that unfamiliar to anyone. You've seen situations like this in other locations throughout the entire metro area. But the other thing we can do with that is by narrowing that down, we have the extra width on the outside that you see with the 5.5 feet or 11 feet left over, that we can designate that outer area for bike lane accommodation through there. So the idea being, we try to present the opportunity to make this a little better corridor for those that are comfortable riding bikes out in traffic. And this gives us that opportunity, again, with reallocating the space. Curbs don't move. All we're doing is changing how we have the stripes on the road. The other thing we gain with this is, with the narrower lanes, usually that has a tendency to just kind of slow people down. We get people in a single through lane, again, versus 2 lanes. I can pass you, you can pass me. We can do that all the way down 86th Street or down Aurora. We don't need to worry about that anymore. Generally, if we get one person going the speed, everybody will be in there right behind them. Still gives you everything you need, though, to get emergency vehicles through. People can pull off to the side, fire, police coming through. You can get out of the way. If we have a just a disabled vehicle. Again, they can get out of the way, people can still get through. So then below that, at the very bottom, this one that says 2 buffered bike lanes, we also propose a portion of this in the corridor from, let's see, about 70, a little west of 72nd on over, generally speaking, over to 86th Street. There'll be some specifics around the middle school I'll show you here in a bit. But the idea with this is, again, we have limited intersections. We don't really have a lot of driveways onto the road from houses or anything, so we don't really have much for interfering turning traffic. So the idea is we even neck it down further. We just go to 2 travel lanes in each direction. And then we create what we call buffered bike lanes, which is, again, we have these bike lanes that we can use to accommodate that mode, but we create this buffering, just kind of this extra space in there that provides a little more physical separation between a bike that might be in a lane and a vehicle passing by them. And then I think the last thing is just a quick note on the parking. The parking, at this point, we've gone into those. When I was talking about the criteria for both of these corridors, one of the things we wanted to look to try to do is not eliminate the parking, still have that opportunity for parking out there. And I'll show you some examples of how we're going to accomplish that and do that. But again, the parking, it's there at times when needed, but yet it's not really an everyday demand where it's constantly being used. Okay, specific to the middle school in there, I know there's a lot of concerns with this. Excuse me. You know, this is just kind of a quick picture looking down on it. Parent pickup every day. You can kind of see in this picture, and I'll go to a little bit of a zoom in. Every day here at the main driveway, we know we deal with that. This can fluctuate a little bit depending on if we have inclement weather. Obviously, it intensifies typically. But one of the things that, you know, we see with that is with the westbound people coming in, which is what you're seeing in this lineup here, they all tend to, you know, wait and queue up along the side. Perhaps some people in here experience this, parent of middle school kids. But then we also see traffic wanting to enter going eastbound where they just queue up. They park, if you will, right in the inside through lane, waiting to turn in left. Unfortunately, that happens, you know, regular basis during the school year, but 10 minutes or so even before school where they're already sitting there. And I have a video of looking down on this, and you can just see people coming up on that line of cars, and they're all stopped and parked, if you will, and, you know, quick maneuvering to get out, realizing that, whoa, they're stopped, and getting around them. Fortunately, with the rollout stop sign out there, I think usually what happens is people are slowing down anyway, so hasn't resulted in anything terrible out there. But again, you have a situation where we have what is normally a through traffic lane with people just waiting in it, stopped. And so, you know, that's something that we think all of this will help address. Okay, so specific to this middle school area, there's a lot here, so let me try to walk through this. I'll try to point at some things for you. On the top, you see, you know, again, those existing conditions where we have the 4 travel lanes. The next one down is this area that, okay, it's a little east of the middle school, right in here. But to show you, we set this up with those buffered bike lanes I talk about where we have 2 through lanes, so we'll be able to keep those 2 through traffic lanes open and moving. We have the bike lane area. When we create the bike lane and the buffering, what that does provide us is that width, which is about 8.5, 9 feet. It provides area where during that 15 minutes after school, when that area starts to fill up with parents picking up kids, it does at least provide that opportunity for a vehicle like you see right there by the arrow, that temporary waiting area. Again, I know you're saying, well, wait a second, you were talking about doing the bike lanes. And that's gonna have cars parked over. We recognize that. This is kind of a compromise in all of this of how do we make all this, how do we try to accomplish all these things, but knowing some of it's just going to conflict a little with each other. But that's how some of this works in our traffic engineering solutions. The last one you see at the bottom, this BB, which is right here at the driveway in a sense, is we'll go back to that 3 lane where we've got, we have ability for bike lanes, we have 2 through lanes, we have that left turn lane for that traffic I was showing you stopped out in the middle. They now have a turn lane at least to be sitting in. So again, less anticipation by someone driving through who'd be, coming up on them, because normally you'd be entering into a turn lane and parked in that. So that reduces that conflict, helps those people for getting in. And then again, we'd still have it's very brief, there's just that short right turn lane. If we had to make that right turn lane all the way, we'd have to do it all the way back to 75th Street, I think, based on all the observations I've seen, as well as hearing things from the neighbors. But that's kind of a reality of the situation out there. So again, we use this 2-lane with the buffered bike lanes for a large part. That helps us out in the afternoon of where people can be, keeps those lanes open, and then the same thing right at the driveway. With this situation, people be out of the way on the right. We'll have the 2 through lanes so people can get through. If you just happen to be coming through when it's a school time, you can still get through. That's important for emergency vehicles so they can get through. And then the left turn traffic would be out of the way and in this middle lane. Okay. Going to give you kind of an overview here of the corridor. We're just going to kind of scroll through and go from, we're on Aurora Avenue, we're going to go from 86th Street over to 70th and just kind of work through here. So again, you see this starting, ending, however you want to look at it. But we have, here's the intersection with 86th Street with the traffic signal. We'll have 2 lanes coming into it, so it's no different than today. You'll still have a lane you can go left in, a lane you can go right in, so we can effectively move people through the traffic signal. We've got the bikes just sharing as they come to that and anticipate, they've got the traffic signal for getting on across, if their goal is to get across 86th Street, or continue north-south. Going away from the intersection is where we begin our buffered bike lane. You can see the single lane going east, and then you see the bike lane that begins. Okay, as that moves along, you can see over there in front of the church where the buffered bike lane is on both sides. And then this purple band I have in there is just to represent for you where that parking is allowed. It's really the only stretch on Aurora we have from 86th to 70th where parking is technically allowed on the street. So we've tried to make a compromise with that. It's kind of a direction of where we've started from, of trying that, seeing if we can make that work, coexist. So that's our goal with that. This carries on really very similar as you just go all the way along here. As you get to 82nd Street, again, we sell those buffered bike lanes, a couple of through traffic lanes all the way through. Really nothing changing in there as we deal with the way we've laid it out. And then now we approach the middle school. And so when we get to the middle school, about 79th Street, this is where we take away that buffering for the bike lanes. The bike lanes will still stay the same. They just lose that little bit of distance between their lane and the vehicle lane. And that extra width gives us the ability to create this long left turn lane for going into the middle school. So again, that's about 300 feet long. If needed, we could actually make it longer, but we should be able to get 12, 14 vehicles in there, assuming everybody kind of pulls into it properly. But that gets those people, so again, they're isolated in a turn lane, not a through lane. And then you can just see across from them how we have to do that, kind of match that up, even though there's no turn lane to go anywhere to the south, but the right turn lane, the bicycle lane. And then you can see how we transition back down to the 2 lanes and the buffering. And this is that area where I talk about, fully acknowledge it, the vehicles and the parents who pick up each day. That's that area they tend to wait in all the way along there to 75th, and I believe they wrap around on 75th quite often. But that's that area in which they would be in, all the way back to there. And then again, that 2 lane there, 75th Street, just be the 2 lanes, bike lanes, and then it will continue all the way to there's the senior center. And so now we're getting near the senior center and the high school. And you can see we've done a similar thing where now we're transitioning into the 3 lane. We've created a nice long left turn lane to go into the high school for either every day when we're dealing with high school traffic or if there's something special going on. This will be a better setup with the traffic signal because we can have left turns across from each other. Instead of being offset from each other this way, you'll now be head to head. So again, that improves sight distance for anybody trying to turn left there and help them out with making decisions. Given the fact we're near the high school, the other thing I always tell everybody is that every year, middle school or a high school, but high school in particular, we're dealing with new drivers. We have new parents coming to the community that are first time experiencing some of this. And then more importantly, we've got 14, 15-year-old drivers with permits that are their first time out there, driving to school. And these type of lane setups are just a better setup for them and making sure they can see properly at the traffic signal and make their turn. We move along, that 3-lane just continues all through there. By the high school, we believe that's still appropriate to have through that distance with 71st. There's just kind of more turning activity through this stretch, so we think that's beneficial to have through there versus the buffering of the bike lanes. And then we carry that all the way to the all-way stop at 70th. And again, a little bit of the difference at 70th, and I'll even zoom in on this a little bit better, hopefully. What do to me, John? Okay. What we have set up there is, today it's an all-way stop. We still don't have any reason to believe we need to change that away from an all-way stop. We think that handles traffic the majority of the time. It also has a way of, even during the very peak times, right after the football game gets done, whatever the big event at the high school gets out, it just kind of keeps people moving, but gets back to that point of mind of having everything kind of calm down a little bit, have everybody going a little slower. We do have a lot of cars at that time. We'll have people on foot. We've got people on bikes. So again, it should work well for the majority of the hours and times we have. But what we're going to have is 2 lanes still coming in to the stop sign. So today you have 2 lanes coming into the stop sign. But today you have a lane you can go through or right, and you have a lane that you can go left or through. What we'll have when we're done is we'll just have an exclusive left. So you'll just be able to turn left from the inside lane, and the outside lane will be a through or right with the bike lane next to it. Again, that idea we're going to get left turns aligned. I know with the always stop, you're obviously not going at the same time. Give some ability for people to do that at the same time. But I believe, again, kind of a better, safer situation. And actually with the bike lanes and everybody compressed in, it actually reduces the distance for pedestrians to cross in the sense of where vehicles might typically be. So that can be an advantage to it as well. So that's Aurora. Let me now walk through 70th, and then we'll be able to get into some questions for everybody. Now we talk about 70th. Remember, we're starting down at Hickman. Okay, Hickman all the way to Meredith. So again, we look at the width in there. We have a little more variety of width in there. Down at the south end, we have anywhere from some portions that are as narrow as 25 feet outwards to 31 feet. And then when we get from Urbandale Drive, where we come together at the Y, from there on north with the 4 lanes, we typically have 41 feet all the way up to Meredith. So we really have 2 or 4 travel lanes, depending on which part of the corridor you're in. The demand is a little greater here. It's up around 6,000, 7,500 a day. Again, same trends and characteristics I mentioned before, where that traffic was greater many years ago. Probably, it was up in the 8,000, 9,000 range, and it's since fallen off a little bit. Again, and we've seen that fairly stable over a lot of years. So any thoughts we have of, again, you hear me talking about reducing lanes, and I know that seems contrary to a lot of people, that how is that better? But again, we're not needing to worry about a future condition where, wow, we're going to wish we had 4 lanes again. We know this can be accommodated. There's those peak hour demands you see again, anywhere from about 600 to 700, even getting close to 800 on a typical peak time on a typical day. Speed limit, overall it's 25 miles per hour from the south end until you get right up north of Aurora it goes back up to 35. And then, again, talking about the capacity of the corridor, when I mentioned that earlier with Aurora, in that 2-lane part, we might be able to push as many as 10,000 vehicles a day through there. Not that anybody wants to live along that, but could you? Yes. And in the 4-lane portion, as much as that 18,000 I mentioned. So again, we have a capacity of a corridor for vehicles that is much, much greater than what we really need in our demand. And then, so some of the unique things in there, again, working with some of these varying widths as we go through there. We've got a couple of key intersections with signals at them. And then the 70th and Mill Drive intersection where it comes together out there, that's kind of a tough one with the skew and the curve. And then we get up to the all-way stop, Aurora. And then I guess the last thing, again, is we have much more parking allowance in this corridor. From Madison, I think it's about Madison is where it begins, that you're allowed to park from there all the way north to Meredith, other than just maybe some short areas right by the intersection, the 4-way stop. And again, I'd emphasize allowance. This is from observations and making notes out there as we go through the corridor, but I'm sure you can all point to a time, 4th of July, high school football games, things like that, where there's a lot of parking out there. But generally, on the typical days, we don't see a lot of parking. So again, we think there's a balance here we can seek between the two items that we're trying to do. I'm gonna have the show going, haven't we, John? That'd probably look a little better. Okay. So, the safety history with it, just comment on that quickly, because that is one of our fundamental goals, what we're trying to do. A little longer corridor, about 72 crashes have occurred in there in 5 years. Good news is we haven't had any severe injuries out there, so that's a very positive. And probably no surprise in there, again, Aurora, the 4-way stop there, and then Douglas with the signal, some of the greatest frequency of crashes occur at those intersections. Again, some of the types, following too close, and again, we look at the causes, and then we look at the types, rear end, side swipe, some of those are very typical of when we have 4 lanes, where people are maybe changing lanes. They don't need to be changing lanes, just do it quickly, abruptly, and then either end up side swiping somebody, or the reality of someone is trying to make a left turn, stopped in a through lane with the rear end. Good news, no pedestrian or bike crashes are reported in that corridor. So during that time frame, so that's positive. Okay, so our concepts of how we're going to do this, our cross sections. Again, working from this first part is just from Hickman up to the Y intersection with Urbandale. So if you see down there in the bottom, actually, so think of it that way, you're down at the south end of the corridor at Hopkins, we have 31 feet. So we actually have plenty of room for 2 travel lanes. Those are like 15.5-foot lanes, more than adequate. What we're looking to do there is narrow those down, where the travel lanes would be 10 feet. Again, this is just with paint, so that's all it is. Someone in a wider vehicle, something comes through there, there's nothing physical in their way. And then that gives you the ability to create the bike lanes with the additional space on the outside. Then when you get to the narrower part, which starts around Hopkins and Rockland, then we narrow down to 25 feet. Unfortunately, that's all the width we have in there. So the accommodation plan in that distance is what we refer to as sharrows. John may be able to help me later with, I think those have been implemented on a couple other streets and some locations and neighborhoods. But the idea there is really just a marking out on the pavement to try to help introduce to vehicle drivers that, hey, this is a corridor that's been designated for bicyclists as part of, an overall route and plan. And so just to be aware, to try to share the road and be heads up for bicycle traffic. So then when we move to the portion that is once the Y comes in on Urbandale and we go into the 4-lane all the way to Meredith, again, no curb changes. We're not changing anything in there. We're working with the pavement area we have. But again, looking at this lane designation and what we have in that stretch, you see the 4-lane. But overall, I'll point you down here to this bottom one. Mostly, we're looking at doing this buffered, this 2-lane with the buffered bike lane section through there. As the traffic demand, we can believe we can fully accommodate that. Again, help calm some of the traffic down, and that we don't have the multiple vehicle lanes for people to do a lot of passing. And then we have a few places where we need the left turn lanes, like when we get to Douglas. It's really configured that one way mostly today, other than having the bike accommodation. And then when we get up to the all-way stop up at Aurora. So those are really the plans from there. And again, the idea with going into this is a parking coexistence with the bike lanes, is to look at that, see if with the infrequency of it in some locations or the majority of the locations, the idea is that an occasional parker may be in that bike lane, but that is part of the trade-off of being able to still accommodate it and yet still try to do the bike accommodations with the bike lanes. And then we'd also look at the speed limit reduction north of Aurora, get the whole corridor to 25 mile per hour, similar to what Aurora is. Okay. So now I'm going to walk you through that same corridor like we did before, but now we're on 70th Street. So we are again starting at Hickman. We start in there after we get through the signal. Again, we have some sharrows. There are sidewalk, and more than likely bicyclists may be getting up to the signal, push button, get across the road, bring up the signal. But as we head north, you can see where shortly after is where we begin the bike lanes. And those would, be installed and implemented through the 31-foot stretch. And then we get down here to, Rockland, right in there. You can see where this is right in this area. When you go through that little curve, that little elbow, that's where the road narrows down to 25 feet. That's where we would just go to the sharrow identification to designate the route is for bicycles, but carry those through. I'll just go ahead and make a comment about, we were asked is there some way to do the bike lanes all without widening the road? We don't believe we can really incorporate bike lanes in that stretch, and some of the widening through there would be quite difficult with the grades to actually move the curbs out 3.5, 4 feet on each side. So at this point, we're just proposing to again, if you remember our initial goals of how we were trying to approach these projects, we just bring the sharrows through there, really just moving right along up the hill. So then we get to Urbandale Drive, the intersection, and there's been improvements there. The bike trail has been widened. That's all done coming from the, I guess I'll call it east, over here, that connects in with the interurban trail where Urbandale and Des Moines join up. And so at that point is where we'd start and end the bike lanes at this point. And you can see how those begin there along 70th Street, and we go down to the 2-lane, which is really not any different than what you've been driving on. If you were on 70th to the south, you've been driving in a 2-lane corridor. Granted, the traffic does go up a little bit right after that point because Urbandale joins in, Urbandale Avenue. So it goes up, but again, we believe the volumes are such that with the 2 lanes, we can adequately serve this. Now you just kind of see as we move along through the corridor, again, we have those buffered bike lanes all through there. And then really when we get to Douglas, no big change there in that working within the constraints of the intersection with the features in the corner and everything, no change in curbs. I'll let that be is just, have the left turn lane, through lane, but we'll do sharrow designation. So again, to try to create that little more ideal situation to help bicyclists and recognition for the vehicles that bicyclists might be out there. And then, again, maybe some slight shifting of the line so that we can create just a little more width for the bicyclists at the intersection. And then, okay, I'll take you down to the other part of the corridor here. Okay, so there we are at Douglas at the signal. So then we go north. Again, the 3 lanes, you can see how the turn lane, really not much different than it is today. It drops and we go into the bike lane, the buffering. And today when you drive down the road, you have the 2 lanes and you have to move. If you're a through vehicle, you've got to move over anyways because the 2 lanes kind of merge down and you introduce the left turn lane. So that goes along through there. there's those purple bands again to designate for you where the parking, generally would start here just north of Madison, the allowance. And again, if you remember in that cross section, if a vehicle should choose to park, someone should park along there, the nice part is they're not really out in a travel lane. Difficult for the bicyclists. If anybody's in here really pro-bicycling, yes, there could be a park lane in that bicycle lane, but that's a reality of the compromise we're trying to achieve to create the bike accommodations overall. So again, and generally speaking, from my observation, other than peak events going on at the high school or other things with Lions Park, don't observe a lot of parking in this stretch. Many of you I know live in the corridor, so you may have different concerns or thoughts about it. Generally what we've seen, but that just carries north, and then we get to, if you remember me describing the four-way stop, and we get up to Aurora, it's not going to be any different north-south than it'll be east-west. We'll basically have the 3 travel lanes, and then we'll have the bike lanes next to it. Always stop will remain. So really should be a fairly minor change there. Again, we have to keep that parking removed back a distance so that we can have the left turn lane created. But then again, we go down to the 2 travel lanes with the bike lanes, and this really just continues all the way north until we get to Meredith. And, some of what I would comment in that too is that when you do, and you can see it right in that aerial faintly, you can see some cars parked over there. I'd say the biggest predominance of parking that I observe when I drive through there quite often is just right in about these first 5 or 6 homes is where I notice parking on that west side of the road. But the thing I would comment is that what's different with a parked car, if you have a parked car in that outside lane, well, now that what is a through lane, if you will, is blocked as well. Might be for a short distance, but again, we have that occurrence of, it's designated here, it is a through lane, but then all of a sudden there's a parked vehicle in it. So again, by at least if the parking is over what we designate as this bike lane, if the parking should be there, it's over in an area that we shouldn't typically have a faster moving, vehicle traveling through it. So that is a walkthrough of the corridors. We've got these maps so that we can go back to them, bring them up, point things out for you. I think the last thing, I just have a couple more points I'd mentioned. AJ had told that I want to make sure I said from the prior meeting. Excuse me. I think one thing to keep in mind with all of this is this lane reassignment. The idea behind it is that's going to be a safety feature for vehicles no matter what you do with bike lanes. 4-lane roads generally don't perform as well safety-wise as 3-lane roads do. We just know that. It's very well proven. I've dealt with road diets in the state of Iowa going back to probably the early 90s, all over from small towns to metro areas. And again, we just see a very big safety performance when we make that conversion. The other thing is usually some of the typical fears with them, I think it's just going to cause major congestion and issues like that don't come to pass. More than anything we find is that we get the results of slowing people down, which usually makes the majority of the people happy. I know there's somebody out there who's not going to be happy about that fact, but it usually does help a lot with that. My other thought is that we said that if John and Kristen came to us and said, we want you to design 2 roads for us, and we knew all about the traffic, we knew all about the land use adjacent to it, but we didn't have those roads out there. Now, that's kind of hard to imagine because these roads have been there for probably 60, 70 years. But if it was like that, if they came to us with these numbers for volume and demand, we wouldn't build 4-lane roads. We wouldn't do it. We don't need to. It would be excessive pavement. It would just be a waste. So we wouldn't do that right out of the gate if we could start fresh today. If we could lift it all up and just start over, we wouldn't do it. So that's another key point to make. Again, reminding you as we go into the discussions, complete streets, it's about all modes. We are trying to do that. I know a lot of people, everybody here tonight, majority of everybody probably came here in a car. So, 90-some% of the people are still traveling around a car. But again, these are some of the things we're trying to do to make these streets that really are neighborhood streets for the most part. They are collectors that take you to other places, but overall, they go through neighborhoods. When you look at all the land use along it, we were along parks, we were along schools. There's a little bit of retail that it connects you to that you call neighborhood commercial that you might want to walk or bike to. So that's the thing to keep in mind. And, around the schools, I think what's important to realize is that, as I mentioned, we get new drivers every year and the young drivers, and safety is forefront in our mind with this. I think, some think, well, if you do the bike lanes, does that introduce more conflict? In some ways, it makes it much more recognizable where the bicyclist is, where a car is, and hopefully that will add some clarity for any young high school drivers. Maybe they're on bikes, but if they're in cars, hopefully it adds some awareness to that. So we think that's a good thing. And some of this slowing everybody down, again, around the schools, generally I've found as much as it can be as a nuisance. If anybody in here is a parent who takes their kid to and from the middle school every day, you go through it and you know what that's like out there. But the idea being is that if we slow everybody down a little bit, maybe put a few seconds back in your trip, is that if we get everything slowed down, usually we have a safer situation. It's better for pedestrians, it's better for bikes, and frankly, it's better for vehicular traffic too, of crash avoidance or injuries. So I think those are some key things to keep in mind, and safety was really one of the things we approached, and given the other constraints of keeping the curbs where they are, minimizing construction, safety was still the most important thing we addressed with this. So with that, AJ.
All right, now is our question and answer period. I'll alternate between sides. I'll come over to you with a microphone. Please give your name and address because this is being YouTube and this will be for our record as well. So we'll start on this side, and I see the first hand over here.
I'm Jean Eby, and I live at 8024 Delwood Drive, Urbandale. I go to the senior center quite frequently, and I think you're a little unrealistic with the cars going into the middle school because I have seen them backed up clear to 72nd where the light is. And so when I come out and I want to go down 75th Street, I have to get in the middle lane in order to go down there. So if you have made that a 2-lane turn thing, or maybe it doesn't have the turn things there, then I can't go, I can't leave. I mean, I just have to wait until all the traffic and the kids get picked up. Because I have gone there and they have been clear backed up to 72nd.
Thank you.
And I like bike lanes. I really do.
Okay. Yes, sir. Right here.
I'll take it. Hi, my name is James Garwood, and I grew up in Urbandale. I live at 4015 70th Street, so I live right across from the Olmsted Urban House. And I'm a Urbandale school bus driver, so I spend my days on Aurora. So no one spends more time on the streets that we're talking about than I do, because I live there and I work there. I think you did a great presentation. The only problem with the presentation is it's addressing something that is not a problem. When I live on 70th Street, I sometimes count how many bicyclists I see going down 70th. Do you know how many I count? Any time of day. So I think it's important to note that this is a great presentation, but it's a presentation on something that is not an issue. There are no bicyclists going down 70th, and there are no bicyclists driving down Aurora. None. So this is an expensive issue where we're going to restrict traffic and the flow of people on our most beautiful boulevards, 70th Street and Aurora. These are the prides of our community, the heart of Urbandale, and we are going to restrict traffic. And the city council beforehand had the foresight to make the lanes 4 lanes. How is that a problem that traffic flows so well on 70th and it flows so well on Aurora? Why do we want to restrict it? And why do we want to build something for no one? Because people aren't riding their bicycles up and down 70th at all. There's a gentleman over there, and I did see you come in. I will say one thing. I have, in full transparency, seen some bicyclists coming down 70th. This is usually around 4 or 5 in the morning. They have the Lance Armstrong shirts, the bullet helmet, the bike gear, the shoes, the whole 9 yards. Those people come in a pack and they ride through at about 25, 30 miles an hour. And I see them about once a week. But other than that, if we're believing that this is some Norman Rockwell, mom, dad, Bobby and Susie are going to go out there and ride their bicycles, if we build it, they will come, is not a real strategy. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Right, this side. Gentleman over there.
Tom Benzoni, 6136 Oakwood in Urbandale. And I am one of the non-existent bicyclists on 70th and Aurora, which we frequently bike. I do have to tell you, the 70th Street actually is frequently a 2-lane road. That's, as a bicyclist, being in the right-hand lane, I'm frequently forced into the left lane of traffic by vehicles that are parked in there. So usually it's 2 lanes going up and down 70th, particularly north of Aurora up to Meredith. Aurora is also, now the section that's been done from Merle Hay East flows very well on a bike, and the cars have been doing terrific on it, much smoother. So taking 2-lane 70th Street to 2-lane 70th Street would leave it as 2 lanes, which it currently function as, with a safe place for our grandchildren to ride their bikes. Thank you.
Yes. Come to the side of you.
Thank you. Just real quick, Eileen Rohr, and I'm on 73rd Place, just south of the Senior Center. Is this all decided, or are Urbandale residents going to be able to vote for this? I'm just wondering, is this decided and you're just are you
No,
informing
no,
us of what's going to happen, or are we going to be voting on this change? That's all I'm wondering.
Right, there still is a process that will still take place. So again, this was our second public meeting, so ultimately all the decisions will come down to the city council on whether it moves forward or not. We'll have in November what we call our capital improvement program process. So that's where we call it capital improvements program, or CIP. So there's a committee that gets together and discusses all the different projects that we have within the city over the next 10 years. That committee then, once the document's done, makes a recommendation to the city council. And then typically in January, the city council discusses the CIP that was been recommended, and then, can make changes, do different things, then adopts it. Then typically we'd go from an adopted CIP, if this project was still in there, we'd come before the council likely January, February, because that's the best time to go out and get bids, bring it to them, ask permission to go out to bid. We'd receive bids and then come back to them and say, here are the bids, which again, be up to them to accept or deny those bids. So there's several more, I'd say, steps. We've just gone to the point now where, again, we've made a design. We're looking for some feedback. If there's any kind of tweaks we would do to it. But we have several other processes, I guess. And then I should also add with the CIP committee, there's a public hearing, which gives the public a chance to talk. And with the council process, there is also a public hearing for, again, the public a chance to talk on this project or any project that is in our plan.
Okay, so it's not, so the public would have a chance to say no?
You'd have your opportunity to voice your opinion again to the city council, and then it does ultimately come down as your elected officials to make that decision. Does it go forward or not?
Okay, so no vote. Okay, thank you.
This side. So the person in blue first. Come to the side of you.
Jenny Mead, 9218 Greenbelt Drive. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on your rationale down Aurora, particularly changing between the 3 lanes to the 2 lanes. That seems confusing to me to our new drivers. I'm most concerned about keeping our middle schoolers safe and our high schoolers safe driving. And I'm thinking of the winter when there's snow on the road and you can't see the lines. So how do we know when to get over, when it's a turning lane? And so why did it change back and forth? So that's one big concern. Secondly, I'm curious if the city is prepared to monitor that and put extra police officers or whatever it may take. Because we have, from the school's perspective, I haven't had a middle schooler in a while, but it's been a problem since my kids were there years ago of people parking along that road. And so I think there needs to be extra supervision there. And I would hope the city would support that if this goes through and the city's changing that for us. And then just to kind of concur with thinking of 70th, I agree. I would say 70th is a 2-lane road because I drive that road many times. I used to work on that road. I go to church on that road. There are always cars parked. So it really is a 2-lane road. So I'm agreeing with the biker in that, what you were saying before, sir, that, it's hard to think that that's actually going to be a bike lane because there's always cars there.
AJL, I can try to answer the question on the, if you look at Aurora, let's see, I've got the right one. Aurora, our primary goal there was we know we wanted, this time I'm going to work you from east back west, okay? So we'll go from, in a sense, a lot of it being where we have 3 down to 2. We start at the all-way stop, and we know we wanted the additional lane there. We didn't want just 2 lanes, just 1 lane in each direction at the all-way stop so that it would work well. So we start with the 3 lanes there, and then we work through the high school. And the high school area, we believe, with the turning traffic in and out of high school facilities, 71st Street leads to the other elementary school that was just rebuilt and expanded, in a sense, from the combination. We know that's got turning movements at it. A lot more. And then, of course, the signal at 72nd, we want the left turn lanes there. So by the time we would wiggle in, wiggle back out, wiggle in, wiggle back out, it was easier to just have that stretch be the 3-lane. So that's why we made the decision to do that one in that fashion. And again, we experienced the most drivers. As far as after that, then we believe these the residential streets, given the traffic demand, we feel we can, turn the traffic in. Opposition, usually not that great other than maybe just a peak time of school. But as we approach towards the middle school, we run into that problem again if we have the reality of the waiting vehicles every afternoon. And if I do the 3-lane in that stretch, okay, right in here where you've all commented and you witnessed the traffic backing up, then if we only have the bike lane, we don't have enough width. So then if you're waiting out there in the way, you're now hanging into the through lane. I'm now pushing the through lane car over farther because it's a narrow lane. So I'm going to push you into that left turn lane. So that's why we believe the 2-lane, because we'll keep those 2 through lanes open. As many of you have said and described, which I thought that to be the case, is that by the middle school on a typical afternoon, those cars are all waiting there. The outside lane does not exist as a lane, as a travel lane, because everybody is stopped in it. So what we have in there is really the 2-lane, very similar, I guess, the other direction. Nobody's parked over there usually on the outside. But that's why we did the 2-lane through this stretch, because we knew we had to have a way and a width to accommodate that waiting traffic every afternoon during school days. And again, from what we've seen, I'm sure inclement weather, it lasts a little longer, but usually it is about a 15 to 20 minute. It may feel like a lot longer, but in the big scheme of a day, usually it goes away within that time frame. We've got video we captured from a drone looking down on it of how it works on a typical day. Again, rain, snow, different. But then we did create the short turn lane going into the middle school because, again, of that thing I mentioned to you of people parking in the inside lane. So that's why we went ahead and went back out. And then so on, we felt after that, it's just the same all the way. So that's why we took it back down to the 2, so we could also have the buffering that we want to try to create for the bicycle use in there. The other thing this will do is it does decrease. There were some people at a prior meeting that talked about the ability for pedestrians to get across Aurora in this stretch with Lakeview Park. And that does, you're not crossing 4 lanes, you're really just crossing 2 lanes if you want to walk across there to go over to the park from the south. As far as the in and the out of, we certainly have other corridors that are like this. People manage and approach 70th and Douglas all the time, and it's got a similar thing. That's 4 lanes, and then all of a sudden it turns into 3 with lanes. Usually, I agree with you. If you have snow, if we have a 6-inch snow and it's coming down right at that moment, yeah, those lane markings go away. And so generally we trust people's habits to know, I know what this is like, and I move over to here, I drive here. After a few wheel ruts, usually it works. After Public Works gets the opportunity to get out, clear the street, usually doesn't take very long, and those pavement markings start to be visible again in what we have. Sometimes hit or miss, it's the climate we live in. So I don't disagree with that. You always go through that when it's a change. Again, some of it is just habit. Again, we find with these streets, you're right, when we do an initial change, it will be a new habit for people of kind of, where do I spatially fit out here when I'm driving my vehicle? But again, we think overall, this will provide kind of the best benefit if we're trying to achieve these bike facilities as well. Have those be as safe as possible.
And Mark, maybe I could just add a little
Yeah.
bit. I just want to hit, Mark's talking when we have the left turn lanes, it's based on, the turning traffic and the demand. Going back to how the presentation started is being a complete streets plan, trying to accommodate all modes of traffic. We can't fit the buffering and a left turn lane with the pavement width we have. The buffering is a couple things. One is to help the bikers feel more comfortable and also provide them more separation between the cars and the bikes. So when it's possible, we are trying to get as much of that buffering in as we can.
My name is Rachel River. I can't give my address. Okay, so I am also an Urbandale school bus driver, and I work for the Urbandale Food Pantry as a driver, and I do live in this general area. So I go through here quite a lot. Some of my school bus stops are along these streets. And so because of that, I agree that this area, particularly 70th Street, is an issue. I am concerned about how we're necessarily going about this. I think that when you guys voted in 2016, maybe things were just different then. I'm not sure. I was graduating high school in 2016. I'm fairly new to Urbandale as a whole, but I have kids in school here and I'm deeply tied to the community. So I had a couple things that I wanted to make a point of and then just some questions. So one thing is I think that, as us have said, is parking is a lot more common than I think you're leading on, particularly along 70th between Aurora and Douglas. I see cars, I drive through there multiple times a day in the school bus as well as in my personal car, and there's always cars parked there. I can say that as a parent with a student who bikes along these roads, I would not allow my high schooler to bike along these roads. I know that the gentleman back there had mentioned making this a safe area for our grandkids, and I can tell you that I've seen the way these drivers drive with a school bus and a stop sign out. So I don't agree that this would be necessarily adding a whole lot of safety, like maybe sometimes, but overall, it seems like the drivers along these roads have a general carelessness for schools, for students, I mean, and young kids. I think that it's worth noting that city council is who we should be talking to about this, but like, are any of them here? Are you? Okay, I don't know who's here, I've never been. Okay, great. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, and I don't know how many of you guys actually live in the area and have like students. Okay, that was another thing, is like I have found that a lot of times the people in Urbandale who make a lot of the decisions live over by Webster and not over here where we're talking about, and I think that makes a difference with their viewpoint. I do want to say that along Urbandale Avenue, where that V comes, it is 2 lanes through there, and that does not slow down cars at all. The cars who go through there are going at ridiculous speeds. I also have a school bus route, like those stops along there are mine. I have students who have to cross the road along there, and I worry frequently about them getting hit by cars that are speeding. I have drivers who are running my stop sign along these roads regularly. Somebody asked about more police presence, and I can tell you that my supervisors have called the police to let them know that there's issues with students being put in danger in these areas because of drivers, and asked if we could have more presence there. And I have not seen a police officer or a car in that area at all this school year during the peak times when I'm letting students off of my bus. And I'm getting people running my stop sign on 70th Street, probably an average of once a day. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 right in a row. And then like today, I didn't have any. One of my concerns, so 75th Street, that intersection right there, 75th and Aurora Avenue, that is like a really big corner right now. There's a lot of traffic that actually turns through there. And so having that down to just the 2 lanes is a concern for me. As a school bus driver, like, you are talking about seconds, but in reality, like, I think that would cause minutes to be added. And after I pick up my middle schoolers, I drop them off and then go to Valerius, my elementary. And so that would affect my route significantly. I also know that the problem with the parking, I've done pickups as a parent at the middle school and as a school bus driver. The parking issue is definitely a thing, but I will say I think a lot of the backing up is they're not consistently backed up to that point. People are purposely choosing to park along that road where they are and having students meet them there. It is not like a pull-up pickup situation. From about the middle school entrance to the school bus pickup lane, which if you look at the screen, you can see over on the left right there is where you enter the middle school as a school. And then the next big one is where the school buses enter. That's about the section of cars that move into the middle school and go around. Everyone from the school bus lane over past the church and all the way down, those are people that are choosing to park there and having their students walk to them. And those of us, like, I have made that mistake before as a parent picking up, of waiting, and then I realized that I was behind 2 cars that were waiting for their students to walk, and I could have moved up and been at the middle school and left by then. So I don't know that there's necessarily a way to mitigate that, but I think it's worth noting that I'm at the middle school during pickup every single day, and the cars that are backed up all the way down are not like waiting to get into the middle school. They're just waiting for students to walk to them. And I think that that's all I have. I think that that pretty much addresses everything. And I still am a little bit confused about who specifically we talk to like voice these concerns. Like, is talking at this meeting enough, or do we need to do more than that?
This is it.
Thank you.
You are kind of short.
Terry Nielsen, I live at 7101 Roseland, and I think what we're doing here is trying to fix something that's not broke. Mainly because, if I understand this right, the stopping on Aurora in front of the middle school, in front of the high school, they're going to be blocking the bike lane, but they're also going to be blocking part of the through lane. And so therefore, people are going to be going into your center turn lane to pass those cars that want to go through. And I don't know if you've been down at the middle school when they drop kids off. Right now, they'll pull up to the stop signs and leave their car parked on Aurora while they unload cars, even going eastbound, and then the kids go to the stop sign and cross. So is what we're going to see is they pull into the turn lane, drop their kids off, and they step out into traffic and cross. And then where does that car go that stopped in the turn lane if they want to go straight through? I think we're creating a problem here that doesn't exist right now. And I'll tell you right now, I think some of this, the problems with the middle school and the high school revert back to our city council and our engineering department, because both the middle school and the high school have been renovated in the last 10 years. And this issue's been going on with this parking on Aurora a lot longer than that. And those issues should have been addressed when they remodeled the high school and when they remodeled the middle school.
Hi, I'm Barb Sheets, and I live on 73rd Place in Aurora, right across the street from the senior center. I'm outside a lot, and to be honest, I never see children riding their bike on Aurora, ever. And if they are riding their bikes, they're on the sidewalk. And if I were a parent with young kids, I would tell them to ride their bikes on the sidewalk, because people are always speeding on Aurora, and I'm all about the safety part, so I can see where some of the turn lanes would be a good idea, but I don't even see adults riding their bike on Aurora. Maybe during RAGBRAI.
Please, I'm allowed to clap and support people.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I mean, maybe during RAGBRAI, I'll see more adults riding their bike down Aurora, but really, I don't see many people at all. And speeding is an issue. I get that. I think more of a police presence, that maybe if they got a few tickets, maybe they wouldn't speed. But other than that.
Out of convenience, I'm going to let this lady speak, and I'll get back over to that side.
I'm Linda Fisher, and I live at 4400 74th Street, so just a block north of Aurora and 75th. I am a bicyclist, and I love that Urbandale has been proactive in getting bike paths, and I've ridden all the bike paths. I've ridden on Aurora, I've ridden on 70th. I just have to say, as a bicyclist and a nice person, it can be terrifying riding your bike on a road. And I've had people cut me off, and I've had people zoom right next to me. And so I appreciate all the work you've done. I don't know what the answer is because I do know, I was a teacher at Olmsted and driven through that area for 30 years, and there is a lot of traffic. And I just want to make sure that you've all taken the time to driven through there at 8 o'clock, at 3:30, because there's cars everywhere. So I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing for everybody. It's a tough job.
And thank you for your presentation. I think you did a fine job responding to your assignment. But I think the assignment misses the mark, and I'm going to concur with Barb and Linda in the front row. I don't think we should be putting bicycles in the street, because I think your solution fails your number one objective, and that's safety. By putting the bikes in the street, it creates an unsafe situation. And as a I bike some, but I drive mostly. The last thing I want to do is hit a bicyclist. I had a sister who died when she was walking in a street and got hit by a car when she was walking her dog. I don't want that to happen to any other family. And so I think the best solution is to spend more money. You could leave the cars between the curbs. Let's let the bicyclists expand those sidewalks we have. Just like Douglas Avenue, we're spending a lot of money doing that, and I support it. I want the bicyclists to feel welcome to ride. We have a great trail system in this community. Let's continue to expand and enhance our trail. There's sidewalks that run all the way from 86th Street all the way to 70th on the north side of the road, right along the schools. Convert them from 4 feet wide to 12 feet wide, and let the bicyclists and the pedestrians be on the safe and sound on north of the road and out of the road in particular. So that would be my suggestion to the city council and everyone who has a vote. Please vote to keep the bicyclists safe and all the people who use these roadways safe. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Richard Kirby, and I've done some research on this, and I presented a lot of this at the last board meeting when this was brought up a year and a half ago, but I did another research this week, and I just typed in what percentage of Iowans ride bicycles, and I came up with an Iowa Bicycle Coalition report, and it talks about the economic health benefits and bicycling in the state of Iowa. So I went down to the table of contents, and I found number of bicyclists on page 51, and this is what it states. I'll just read a paragraph of it, that's all there is. To find the number of bicyclists in Iowa, data was collected from both trail use and commuter use. The commuter use data was found in the U.S. Census Bureau in 2010. Granted, that's 14 years ago, but I don't think it's increased that much, maybe double at the most. But it says the commuter data American Community Survey compiled by the League of American Bicyclists. The survey provided data for 4 cities in Iowa, including Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, Iowa City, and Sioux City. The average percentage of bicycle commuters in these 4 cities is 1.75% of the population. Because Iowa City is a large outlier, and with the college, it distorted the numbers a little bit, but that was calculated in this report. It also went on to state that this report was done and collected mainly between the months of May and September, because that's when the bicyclists use the facilities. The other 7 months, it was an insignificant amount. So I think for 1.75% of the population that rides a bike, compared to the 4,000 or 6,000 people that travel this road, I think it's unnecessary to put bicycles in the road for that small a number.
My name's Mike Borland, and I live at 4465 91st Street. And for years, I commuted down Aurora and 70th Street on my bicycle. So maybe I was in that 1.75%. In that time, since those figures, that's kind of the time that e-bikes have developed, and they've become very popular. Putting e-bikes on Aurora and 70th Street will get people to shops, and I imagine there'll be more destinations in the future as connectivity increases. The more bicycles that we see on streets as motorists, the safer it's going to be, because right now motorists don't look for bicycles. If bicyclists are on the street, they're more of the consciousness of the drivers. They're more aware if they're pushed to the side or riding on sidewalks. And I don't ride on sidewalks because it just isn't safe for the pedestrians. And it's not safe for me because they're bumpy, uneven, and have drop-offs and stuff like that. I would have welcomed the bike lanes on Aurora and on 70th. I don't mind going around a parked car. And even though it's just some paint on the road, I feel safer when that's there instead of cars coming at me and knowing that I'm kind of in their way. I don't know if you have projections for how much bicycle traffic will increase. I know that a lot of people won't go on Aurora and won't go on 70th Street on their bikes now because it's not safe. There are no accommodations for them at the present. And it is true, if you build it, they will come. I know that my group will. I know that the group that I ride with will ride anywhere that there's marks on the road, any trails, as long as there's a sandwich and maybe a beer at the other end.
Joan Racky, 9008 Iltis Drive. I have one question. We've had a lot of discussion about the schools. I want to know what discussion there's been with the school principals, superintendent, school board related to these proposed changes.
Address that to a certain extent. I know when this was first proposed, the plans were shared with the school administration, demonstrating what the plans were, and they were almost identical to this. Earlier this year, our staff went and met with the Student Senate, representatives of the high schoolers, the student population, to get their input and ideas on this. And I'm trying to think, we've had, again, this will be our second meeting this time. We had some preliminary information last year, but the school itself, I cannot address whether or not the school board has taken this up individually and spoken about it. We provided them information. I know Dr. Daka is here, whether she can address that or not. It really is a city project, but we did inform them of that, and we did seek students' input because they're part of the issue that has been brought up tonight. Now, how do student drivers, how do student pedestrians, bicyclists, how do they operate in that environment probably more than any of us during the school year. So their input was thought, and I know our staff member was there, and I think it was received fairly positively by the students.
Okay. My name is Victoria Trahan, and I go to UHS. Why am I sounding like this? Oh my God. Anyway, so I cross at 70th and Aurora several times a week, and I feel as though the new setup of the road will not make it safer, because I feel like the issue isn't that it's like a 4-lane, because like even if there's someone in the turning lane and then there's someone like just going in the straight lane, then that's still the exact same amount of cars they're gonna have to like walk in front of. But my biggest issue is that people don't really respect the stop signs or pedestrians. They more or less like will stop at the stop sign, but then they start like creeping forward while I'm in the road. Or like I've seen several times where like people will be like in the middle of the road and someone will like turn left in front of them. So then you have to stop in the middle of the road. So like I feel like it's not an issue of the way that the road is set up. It's more so about the way that people are driving. So that's all.
Thanks, AJ. Jason Menke, 8011 Maple Drive. I want to just go back to the statement that I think Terry made earlier, questioning the logic and reasoning behind city engineering in the school district in terms of the layout with the 2 remodeled schools in the last decade plus. I think if you go to any school district in the country, go to any middle school, go to any elementary, you are going to find that pickup and drop off is a cluster. And what we have been talking about, people parked on Aurora, parked on 75th, waiting for their kids to come get them. People stopping in traffic to let their kids out on Aurora and then cross the street. That's human behavior that no amount of engineering, no paint on any pavement is going to solve for. So I don't have the answer. I don't know, honestly, will this make pickup drop off at the high school, at the middle school, any better or any worse? But what it does not solve for is the human behavior that's involved that districts and cities have been dealing with since we first laid pavement down.
Thank you. My name is 2821 Sherry Lane. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but as someone who has spent, I have a unique experience on this as someone who spent years commuting up and down Aurora to work, and also someone who bikes on Aurora to pick up my CSA, Community Supported Agriculture basket. I'm not the Lance Armstrong biker or any sort of special biker of any kind, but I can go from my house on the trail all the way to Aurora, and then it's on Aurora going down that fun hill that I go down to get my CSA, and I would love to have more protection to be able to do that. So thank you for the presentation, and I definitely learned things tonight.
I'm Charlotte Roddick. I live on the corner up there of 76th and Aurora. I've been there almost 50 years. I agree with a gentleman back there. I think we're trying to do something that doesn't need to be corrected. I can sit on my deck, and the cars are all parked there right by my house, going right down. They're very respectful. They stay in that lane when they park. I can always turn left because they leave me a lane right there. I have no problem going east or west on Aurora when the schools are coming out, letting out. I don't know, I guess that's, I appreciate the bikers. I don't see bikers. I see kids. I see kids riding bikes. I see adults with their children riding bikes, but they're not on the street. They're on the sidewalks. And I think if the sidewalks were better, they could use that. And then we do have wonderful trails. I also think there's a speed problem. I follow the speed limit. And if there's only one lane, there's going to be a pile of people behind me, and they're not happy. And I say, I meet new friends all the time because they honk at me. But I go the speed limit, and people don't. Aurora, it needs to be slowed down. I think if we put some stoplights in, on maybe 75th, maybe it's 70th. I think 70th is dangerous. I think 70th is very dangerous. You've got 4 lanes of people trying to, there. So if there are stoplights there, or make it go all the way through, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm not the engineer, and I think you presented something very, very good. But let's see, one more thing I was going to say, but I'm getting old, I can't remember. I don't know. I'll leave it at that. But I think this is a great thing, but I don't think it will work. I think things are fine just the way they are. Thank you.
I'm Barb Schnorr. I live at 4205 70th. Been there about 3 years now. I wanted to follow you because 70th and Aurora is a dangerous intersection. People do not know how to navigate that all-way turn. When we diverted traffic from Douglas because it was closed for those 2 blocks and for a couple of months, we had about 4 accidents out in that intersection just in that time. And last December, there was a taxi pedestrian accident. So I just wish that they would look closely at that intersection, because any change that you make is going to affect the accident rate there. I don't know why they can't navigate it, but since I have to go through it all the time to get to my driveway, I go through there very slowly.
Sean Wolf, 4424 70th Street. Appreciate all your time and effort doing all this. I know there's a ton of time you guys put into all this, so we appreciate that. I'm a bicyclist and a runner. The high school lady back there, and also you, I've questioned for years why there's no stop light at 70th and Aurora. I do not understand that. I've called into the traffic division for 15 years, probably every couple of years, going, why isn't there not a light here? From 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday, you got high school kids, junior high kids trying to cross that street.
5-year-olds, kindergarten, and the problem is that now all of those Jensen kids have to go through Olmsted, so they're going through that.
Yeah.
So you have little kids going through that.
Yep. And I'm on my running route. That's one of my running routes. And every night, not every time, but probably 75% of the time, I have to hit the pavement because someone is blowing through that intersection. And 75% of the time, before I leave for my run, I tell my wife, well, hopefully I get back to you. And 75% of the time when I get home, well, you about got widowed again. It's just crazy. The speed is so bad up and down from Meredith down to Douglas. I see people racing, motorcyclists racing up and down that street. I'm right across the street from the New Hope Church on Wednesdays and Saturdays and Sundays. That's a huge traffic problem. I believe in Christ. I love churches, don't get me wrong, but that's a huge people in and out of there on Wednesdays and Saturdays and Sundays. If you have a bicyclist, I ride on a sidewalk. I don't trust motorists. If there's a way to control the parking where people couldn't park on that outside lane, I'm all for this. But you're gonna have bicyclists veering in and out from parked cars into incoming traffic, coming behind the bicyclists. I think you're making it more unsafe for bicyclists and runners. Sometimes I'll see runners running in the street, which you're crazy. But, and then I wish there'd be a stoplight at that 70th and Aurora. You got a stoplight at 72nd and Aurora. You got a stoplight at 70th and Meredith. I've been told, well, there's not enough traffic to have a stoplight there. It's the same flow of traffic from 70th to Meredith. You got the same flow of traffic to 72nd and Aurora. I've seen, like I said, I've had to hit the pavement, lay down before I got hit. And I've seen kids almost get hit. It's this, you're gonna have the change here and the days are gonna get shorter. You're gonna have kids walking in there in the night, you know, when the sun's not coming up yet or sun's already down. Coming out of this, I just wish there was a stoplight at 70th and Aurora. So I appreciate everything you've done. I know there's a ton of time you put into this, so appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Makes me sound violent.
I'm gonna sit over here then.
My name's Angie Nierenfeld. I'm at 7408 Ridgemont Drive in Urbandale. I have a daughter that goes to Olmsted as well. I think that these are great ideas. I don't think it's addressing the problem. I do think that we need to watch the people that speed on Aurora. I think that's a bigger concern. I am through that neighborhood all of the time. And it is easy on 70th to increase your speed. One thing I would like to note too is we have all these improvements going on at Lions Park, but then we are reducing traffic. We already can't see at 72nd and Prairie. And now we're going to reduce lanes on Aurora. You're creating a bigger parking problem. We need these lanes and we need more parking area. If we want the people to be off the street, get them into a parking lot. That seems to be better. We see it at Olmsted too. They're parked in the street. There isn't any more room. There is no more room. So if we're going to keep building at Urbandale and keep building in the high school and improving the parks and bringing more structures in, make a spot for the people to park that's safe. It just isn't safe right now.
Hello, Megan Cooper. I'm at 4508 71st Street behind the high school. And I just had two things I wanted to say. I'm worried about our compromise at the middle school. When you had mentioned, oh, they can park or drive in the biking lane during that time. That worries me. I would not like to see that, or very descriptive signs, which I highly doubt. Because if we can do it in Urbandale, can we do it in Des Moines or West Des Moines, so on and so forth? But I also, with your research, if I could partner with you afterwards and get any of your insight for the 70th and Aurora. Typically, if I'm running errands and it's school time, I will stop my car and assist children to cross the street, because we've had a lot of instances where kids have been hit by cars. Last year, we had a group of like 5 or 6 kiddos. They huddled together to cross the street because they were so terrified. So just with your research, I'd love to hear what you have. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Gouling. I'm just wondering, I understand that this might be the most cost-effective way to do it between the curb to curb. Has there ever been a look at putting a larger bike path along Aurora, similar to what was done on Douglas? And I don't know if that's been looked at. I would be interested in knowing the cost, because I think Urbandale as a whole is biker friendly. We have the paths, we want the cyclists in our community. And as I'm sitting here, I think everyone is just concerned about safety for everyone.
Sure, and I can answer that. And Mark has up on the screen now. So, whoops. Yep.
There you go.
So we kind of look, you know, the lanes are here that we have roughly maybe 11 and a half, 12 and a half feet between the curb and the right-of-way line. So that's kind of the place where you would put a sidewalk or a trail. Keep in mind, as we look at it here, it's showing flat out there. It's not completely flat like that. So if you wanted to have, you know, an 8, a 10-foot trail, it just doesn't physically fit. So and there's also, you know, power poles, things like that. So what would need, it's not impossible. What would need to be done is likely we would need to narrow up the roadway. So you'd have to remove roughly half of that north lane, take the curb and gutter off, remove it, and then put a new curb and gutter in to create enough room to put a trail on that north side. So it is possible. It is a very expensive option, but it is a possible option. It's been several years since we have done a cost opinion or kind of estimate on that. And those estimates were prior to the last few years when, you know, construction costs have really gone up. So I can't tell you how much it would cost. So anyway, it is possible. It would just be a complete change of what's out there. We'd have to change the width of the road to make room for that trail along the roadway.
I just wonder if we look at that in with the current construction, it just sounds like there's still a lot of safety concerns and parking issues as a whole still with this current plan. And so I'm wondering if there's other ideas we can still consider as we're brainstorming solutions.
Rosalie Dack, I'm at 4002 139th, also the school superintendent. I just think it's important to point out, I don't want people to leave here thinking that the city doesn't collaborate with the school district. Over the last 3.5 years, we've worked together to reassign crossing guards to those very places that are being mentioned, 70th and Aurora and the middle school, so that our kids can be safe. Back to what Jason said, it's a human problem because now they're just dropping those kids off further back, still in not a legal or safe place. But I don't want you to leave here and think that the city has not been a partner with us. And somebody asked, what does the school district want? We want our kids to be safe, and we want to work with the city to make sure that whatever happens here, whatever the voters approve, whatever city council approves, that we can be safe for our kids. So that's my input.
Hi, I am Joey Ehlers. I live at 7300 Ridgemont Drive. And I have 2 comments. First of all, I love the city. I love Urbandale. I love where we live. We live right by Olmsted School. When they redid the school, which we were happy that they did, we have so much traffic on our street. We have buses that go down. We have cars that are parked there because there isn't room. My concern with this is that people are going to divert off of Aurora to avoid what we have or what you're proposing and start using those side streets. The second thing, dear, what was the second thing? Oh, I would wonder how many people don't even know that this is a potential project. I randomly found it on Facebook. My husband's on Facebook. I'm not, but I was on his account. I randomly found it and thought, oh my God, I got to get to this. Sunday's paper came out after the first meeting, and it said, Urbandale's planning bike lanes. And I thought, you're kidding me. It's already been decided. So it's hard to know. People talk about who do we talk to about how we feel about it beyond this. And I think that I don't know how to address that. So those are my comments. Great presentation. It was really helpful.
Okay, Rachel River, again, I work for the school bus barn. And I think I've been making a lot of notes. I know it's getting late, so I'm gonna try to be quick. I think the overall kind of consensus is that the speed and the safety of these roads is an issue, but bikes in the road are maybe not as much of an issue. I think that parking is an issue. I see that myself. I kind of wonder if there's just other options, like has the city looked into those like automatic speed limit signs? The ones that like register how fast you're going. I think that those have shown to be very helpful. I know that a couple people have said like that trails would be a bad idea, but I think that Urbandale's already added a lot of trails. I think that the majority of the section on the north side of Aurora, a lot of that is areas that I think could easily have a bigger trail without a lot of like individual properties being like affected, just because a lot of that property is, I guess, just big, like the schools and the recreation center and the church. I think that there was a couple of things that I forgot to mention before. The students crossing the road, across the road from the high school, that's currently like a really big issue. I've heard that there has been a student who got hit through there once before. There's not, like, the students you see where the light is right there, the students aren't crossing at that light. They cross kind of right out from the building between 72nd and 71st Street. As a school bus driver, I'm going through there just as they're crossing. That is a huge issue, in my opinion. It's a huge safety issue. And I think that that is something that should be addressed and should be a big point. I know that school crossing back and forth is not used quite as much as like the road as a whole, because school's only in session for so many months and they only go back and forth during like the beginning and end. But I think that's a huge safety issue, and I'm always amazed that it has never been addressed. And I also want to know how wide the lanes currently are along 70th Street and Aurora, and then like the individual lanes, and then how wide you're proposing that they are now. Like in your, see, the outside lanes as of right now in the existing conditions, on your graph it shows them equal. In reality, I don't think that they're equal. My school bus, I have to ride on the outside lanes to let students drop off, and I can't fit my bus through there in a lot of areas, partially because they've got like poles and stuff in the way, so I can't, like my mirror would hit the poles if I was fully in the lane. So right now I'm having to choose between entering someone else's lane or hitting a pole, neither of which are really a great option, obviously. I also didn't know if anybody knew how wide the trail is on Urbandale Avenue. I feel like it's not 12 feet. I don't know how wide it is, but I feel like that's a much more reasonable size for the usage that this area gets compared to like a 12-foot trail like we have along Douglas. And I did want to verify, like, I do use side streets as opposed to Douglas, so I do think that this would divert cars more often onto side streets. Like, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really valid point that's worth thinking about, because I know that particularly like Roseland all the way down from basically 70th to 86th, that's a big cut through that people use just to avoid Douglas. It's one that I use personally, so I agree that it'll push a lot of traffic to side streets, which is worth thinking about.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, let me, maybe between John and I, we can, a couple of these things you were asking about lanes. I tried to zoom in on that better, so hopefully you can see it better. But generally speaking, 41 feet in there, so those lanes are around 10 feet. It may, pavement marking may wiggle a little here or there, but might be a little narrower. That's existing. Proposed, you can see we keep those 10-foot lanes, where we have this like 3-lane, but we're obviously moving. If your school bus, for example, would be in this lane here where you're seeing the taillights of this car, you'd still have that additional buffer distance away from the curb, utility poles. You're correct, old infrastructure area, so you have utility poles that can be close to the curbs with what's going on, so it would move you away. It would also make school bus maneuvering at intersections easier, because if you're in the right lane turning right, you're gonna be moved farther out. So it should make it easier for a school bus to make a maneuver, because we do have to consider those. I don't drive one, so I'll trust you. But it should, as we move that out, make that easier. And then if you're in the 2-lane part, we were looking a little wider lanes, 12-foot lane, again, and you'd have that buffering distance. Again, is there going to be as many bicycles in those lanes as there are cars going and traveling? Probably not. But there'd be that room, again, kind of get moved away from, as you said, some of those hazards, those mailboxes, those utility poles, those other features along there. John, I think that trail width. You had one quick question I'm thinking you can answer. You said something about the trail, maybe.
Right, because our typical for trails is when we're adjacent to major streets is 10 feet wide. A lot of times through the parks, it's only 8 feet wide. Urbandale Avenue, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 10-foot trail, correct? Sorry, okay, is it an 8? Sorry, yep, so it's an 8-foot on there.
Another question for Mark. To talk about the separate trail, 10, 12, however wide on the side, would that have the traffic calming and safety benefits that putting the buffered lanes and so on and cutting the lanes down on Aurora, would that have the same effect, safety-wise?
The safety standpoint of doing that, there's, let me get over here by the mic. There's different things out there on side paths and trails when we separate them and put them over the side. It's kind of a function usually of how much turning traffic off of main streets onto side roads or driveways, of interaction between bicyclists and vehicles. I know sometimes we tend to like the side paths where we have much more wide open, farther distances between driveways and intersections, akin to the growing areas of the community where all the room is out there along 156 and Meredith and so on, where you can put the side path. If you were to do something like that, the benefit would be, again, I'll go out on the limb here. If I don't have to write a check for it and say, how do you redesign Aurora? Okay, how do you approach that? If you could start over, like I mentioned, if they were to come to us and say, we have no road, we want to put a road here and a bike accommodation, everything, that would be a way you could approach it and try to fit everything in there. And again, if we could narrow those curbs in and get it down to a 3-lane road instead of a 4-lane road, a lot of things I've heard a lot of people out here say the same things over and over again, which is speeding. Well, the speeding comes with a 4-lane road. It comes with a 4-lane road because you've got 2 lanes to go in each direction. And you typically, because it's not that busy, you typically can pass somebody if you just don't like whoever said driving the speed limit. If you want to get around her, you can zip around her. And so that's why we tend to find the safety with the 3-lane roadway section, because again, we get everybody in a single through lane. And my point of we have a pipe out there on both corridors that is way bigger than what we need. And so again, why can everybody move through it so quickly? regardless of a speed limit sign or enforcement, is because it's wide open, and so they feel they can go a lot faster, which again is not a good mix with the kids you've mentioned and pedestrians and issues around the school. So again, one of the things we'd like to do to get it all slowed down.
I don't see any more hands. So again, thank you all for coming. I am remiss that I didn't mention that all the council members and the mayor are here tonight except for one. One gentleman, Blake Rosendahl, he had business out of town. He is going to watch the YouTube afterwards. He was here for the first meeting. So I was remiss in not mentioning that. And that's why, one of the reasons why we had these meetings, and as John mentioned, the series of public hearings and other issues that we try to keep as transparent as possible with all of our projects. At times it is difficult to get everybody notified, but we try to do our best. And we'll be looking at new ways of getting that information out. Having said that, if you have questions, if you have your email there, if you can contact the engineering department, if you have questions about what we discussed tonight, this will be further discussed, as John mentioned, at the CIP committee. We'll get direction from council. This has been, again, it's a planning document. Not everything in our CIP committee list or CIP list gets approved. It becomes too costly, everything, council's priorities change. There's a whole host of reasons why certain things move forward or not move forward. So please understand this was an opportunity for the council to learn more about what the public thinks about this configuration. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to get back to our staff. And again, without any further questions, thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate it.